Simon, you are playing word jokes with a dyslexic. This is going to end badly for everyone.
Oh no.
I am joined by the legend, the man, the myth that is Mr. Simon Phillips. Yes. How are you?
Thank you. By the way, I think it's, according to Francis Rossi, it's actually pronounced leg end.
Simon, you are playing word jokes with a dyslexic. This is going to end badly for everyone.
Oh no.
Simon, you have been the drummer for, I don't even know where to start. Jeff Beck, Nik Kershaw, Mike Oldfield, The Who, Judas Priest, Joe Satriani, Hiromi, and obviously you are probably to some best known for being the drummer for Toto from 1992 to 2014. I guess it would kind of be easier to ask who you haven't played for, right? That is a massively impressive back catalogue.
Yeah, I mean, there's still, still many people that I haven't played for, and a couple of people that were not so impressed, didn't want me. But that happens, that always happens. I believe Tom Schultz from Boston. Somebody turned up at my house to do a recording session, and so I played this track, and apparently he hated it, absolutely hated it. I don't know why. And AC/DC, I was asked to do a record with them once, but the manager, Stuart Young, called me and said, "Look, can you go and rehearse with the boys?" And I went, "Well, I don't normally rehearse. I usually just turn up at the studio and do the record."
Sure, yeah.
Kind of important. I went, "Oh, okay," And it was the funniest. I mean, we actually had a beautiful time. There was a big power cut down at Stanbridge Hall, which was near Gatwick. And so we spent the whole evening just having dinner and drinking, and because they had an Arga, so they could cook food and generate. They got generators in for the next day, and we played. And I mean, it was just obviously wasn't going to work. I mean, Brian and Cliff were having a ball. We were having a great time.
Yeah.
But the brothers, they just didn't.
Right.
I don't play like that. I'm reactionary. If the singer does something, I'll do something. I'm that kind of player. They don't want any reaction at all. They want it absolutely dead simple. And I think halfway through the rehearsal, I think I just stood up and said, "Look, this obviously is not going to work. No problem. No hard feelings. Were really lovely, really lovely guys." And I actually met them later when I was living in LA, and I had a session to do at Ocean Way, and I recognized the guitar tech, Alan Brogan.
Right.
Bless him, who's no longer with us, sadly. And he said, "Hey, come and say hello to the guys." I went, "Oh, okay," So I walked in, and it was great. They were having lunch in the drum booth, and Brian, bless him, he said, "You got to have a look at me." I mean, I couldn't understand a word he says. And he lives in Florida.
Yeah.
And I'm English, So, but he really wanted me to show. He wanted to show me his lyrics. So we went into the vocal booth, and he was showing me all that. It was so sweet.
Amazing.
So
one of the, talk about going down memory lane for you. I would like to take you back even further, if I may. My first introduction to you, Simon, was actually when I purchased a DVD called Super Drumming, and this was from the 1980s with Pete York, Cozy Powell, Wolfgang Schmid, all these great players. I think the record that you did was called Don't Step in It. And I remember being a teenager and watching you play this kind of 3.5 minute, quite upbeat, funky instrumental track with just fuckloads of polyrhythms, basically. And I remember watching and studying your playing and thinking, there is a reason, I think, Simon, as to why whenever it is I'm chatting to a drummer, that people seem to always cite you as one of their biggest influences. And I think having that early viewing on that Super Drumming DVD, I can completely see why. But is that a compliment to you that, sort of 30, 40 years later, you're still being cited as such a big inspiration to some of the world's biggest players now?
Oh, absolutely. Of course. It's, it's lovely to be, revered or mentioned or whatever, What's interesting over here is a lot of the heavy metal drummers, some of their introduction to heavy metal was Sin After Sin, Judas Priest.
Mhm.
And after that, Michael Schenker group. And it's so funny how, I mean, I get sometimes texts from like John Tempesta, for example, and he'll say, "Hey, man, I'm listening to MSG, and he'll ask a question. What were those drums? Or, where did you record that? Or whatever, I do remember, a lot of, especially around that time, I remember the sessions very well.
Do you?
Actually, even today. Yeah. So, and I find it's interesting because, I wouldn't say, well, it wasn't called heavy metal back then. We didn't
No.
have that term. It was called just heavy rock. And
Okay.
I played on a lot of heavy rock records.
You
But
did.
funnily enough, I didn't think of it as playing heavy rock because I always wanted to make it groove more.
Yes.
So I used to use a trick when I did sessions.
Mhm.
I would always kind of play the opposite way to the way that people would imagine.
Okay.
So if it were a rock track,
Yeah.
I would actually, believe it or not, I would kind of think, how would Bernard Purdie play this?
Okay.
Right? And then if it were a more of a funk track, I would think, how would Ian Pace play this?
Right. Got you.
I
Yeah.
would go splashier on
Yes.
the funky stuff, and I'd go kind of tighter on the rock stuff, rock music, the rock style.
Your playing
It,
is it's so disciplined, but it has so much flair and distinction. And I think from everything that I've seen of what you do, that kind of speaks volumes. Especially, again, kind of growing up, I remember the Toto Live in Amsterdam DVD from 2003, and I just again, as a drummer myself, I remember watching your playing and just thinking like, how do you do that? How do you get those licks in there so quick? And how are you so on the beat? Like there's no other drummer that is as on the beat as you. Like that's so difficult to be that precise.
Oh, I think there are a lot of players that play like that. I mean,
No, take the
first of all,
compliment. Take the compliment. Stop it.
I mean, first of all, you've got Jeff Beccaro,
Yeah.
who, so many people cite Jeff as their main influence. And Jeff and I kind of had a similar, although very different and on two different sides of the world, we had kind of a similar upbringing in that our fathers were both musicians.
Mm-hmm.
We were thrust into the studios very early. I was probably in the studios earlier than Jeff. I started doing sessions, well, with my father. I started doing them when I think my first session, I was 13 years old.
Wow.
So, but in terms of out in the big wide world, outside of my dad's band, I was in the studio doing sessions when I was 16 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it may not be only years difference, but I had that I guess that discipline or disciplinary upbringing of
Mm-hmm.
playing music very, very early on. And Jeff also, he had a great discipline too. Plus, time was just ground into me by my dad.
Right.
And
okay.
I think with Jeff, time was grounded to him by his father.
Sure.
And by all the great musicians he was around.
Yes.
So we both kind of had this, I guess, sensibility. What I did with that discipline, I wasn't happy to just play what everybody expected. There's quite a bit of the radical in me as well.
Yes. Yes.
As Pete Townsend said, I'm an anarchic player.
Right.
So there is a certain amount of anarchy, and I will try stuff. I mean, I don't play safe.
No.
I don't. I just play, but I do mind what is the music telling me to play, basically. That's really what it is. Is there an opportunity to make this a little different, a little more exciting? You take a risk, doesn't always work, but I've always been up for that. I've always tried to look at something a little bit differently, which is hence why sometimes I don't play the normal rhythm that you would expect. I try to look at it from a different angle.
Honestly, I love your playing. I love everything about your playing. I really, really do. And, for all those reasons that you've just stated, I think that is why you are so highly regarded in the world of drums. I wanted to ask you, if I may, obviously you've mentioned Jeff. Was there, when you joined Toto after he passed away, was there a fine line between being able to breathe as an artist in yourself and putting your own spin on tunes that had already been recorded and tested live? Or did you feel that for the fans of Toto at that time that you had to stick specifically to what Jeff had written and recorded? And I guess I asked that specifically with Rosanna.
That situation came up at various times. Probably any situation you get into with a band that's had a history and plays a tune, like, for example, I think the first time would probably be Jack Bruce.
Okay.
And with Jack Bruce, we would play Sunshine of Your Love, and we play White Room. So already you're playing a piece of music that's already been played by another drummer.
Yeah.
In his case, Ginger Baker. But I think that's another thing, because I had that experience with Jack. His attitude, he would never turn around and say, Ginger didn't play it like that. You should play it like the way Ginger played it. He would never, ever say that. He has a much more jazz approach to his song. He's thinking of the song. He doesn't really care how you play it. No. It's how you interpret it. That's why he's picked me as the drummer and picked Tony Hymas and Huey Burns.
Yeah.
For him, it's just another version of the same song.
Yes.
And the same thing happened playing with Mick Jagger. I would do certain things that Charlie would play, and I would change a lot of other things. It's the same with The Who. There's certain things I would play. If there was a certain fill that really tickled me that Keith Moon played, I would do it.
Yeah.
Just purely because I love it and I think it's great. But most of the time, I did my own thing, and that's what Pete wanted. He didn't want somebody copying. No. And it was the same with Toto, and I think that's the reason why they chose me. Over all the many people they could have chosen in Los Angeles. They didn't want somebody to go and try to copy Jeff.
Right.
They wanted somebody with their own voice, their own sound. So then it becomes a question of respect for the song.
Yeah.
Well, obviously, Rosanna, the most notable thing about it is, of course, the Purdy Shuffle, which had been around, by the way, quite a while. I played on plenty of tracks with that same groove years before. I mean, it wasn't really anything new, but Jeff made it. It was a hit and made it very popular. And of course, he played it absolutely beautifully. So obviously, you got to play the same groove. It's the song. But I would play it differently. I would do the phrases my own way. I know, having obviously played that song for, over 21 years, I know the way that Jeff phrased it. And those licks, the brass licks, I wouldn't be able to do it that way because, first of all, I'm ambidextrous and mainly left-handed, so things come out very differently. Plus, I phrase things differently, So a lot of that is different, but in the big picture, still the same song, still the same groove. So it's really out of respect to the song.
Yes, I get that.
The player.
I understand. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, I'm not saying I'm very respectful of all the, all the songs that you played on, But it's when you come to that, I think of the music. I don't try to copy somebody.
No,
I just
no.
think, what is this song? So it's a mixture.
And yeah. No, I get that. It's a fair answer. You and I, before we sort of went live with this, I briefly made a Spinal Tap quip at you because you're the only person I've ever interviewed who has two separate Wi-Fi's in their own home, which is pretty impressive. But you have played with an enormous collection of musicians over the years. I'm sure you can probably tell where this question is going. What, Simon, in all your active years of being both a band member, a session drummer, and somebody that's called upon, constantly for work, what has been the biggest Spinal Tap moment of your career?
Oh, wow.
Let's name and shame some people. Let's do it.
No, gosh, I've got to think. Well, I think John Entwistle probably gets, in some ways, the best award for that, because he would have on stage a huge rig.
Right.
His bass rig was larger than most bands' PAs. And he had an absolutely identical rig set up in the wings as well, just in case.
That's phenomenal.
It's brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. Let me think. Jeff Beck.
Yeah.
When we would travel to the States, and now I'm talking late 70s, early 80s.
Okay.
You could not get Heinz 57 baked beans in the States.
Okay.
You could not get vegetarian baked beans in the States. They
course.
all had bacon in them, or sausages or something. So when we're checking in to fly over there, he's got this big crate, 24 cans of Heinz baked beans he's checking in. And we're looking, we're going, oh, wow. And then the next thing he's checking in is like a diff,
right,
from one of his old hot rods that he's taking over to LA to fit to another car. And he's checking that in. It was hilarious. He didn't have a guitar. There were no guitars checked at all. It was hilarious.
Well, legend has it that Nigel Tufnell was actually based on Jeff Beck. That's what the rumor has.
Definitely. Yeah. And I do have to. There's a lovely story with Jeff, which will be in my book. We flew. This is probably around 1986 or 87, and we're just starting to. We've just recorded Primitive Cool with Mick Jagger.
Nice.
And we're putting a band together. So Mick invited us both over to do a bit of rehearsing. So we flew from Heathrow, Virgin Atlantic, over to New York, and we were there for a few days, and we were rehearsing. And we flew back, and of course, when you come back from the States, especially in those days, customs. When you had long hair and were a musician, 9 times out of 10, they stopped you.
Yeah.
And there was this young lady, customs officer, who was absolutely sure she had a bust.
Right. Okay.
So we're kind of waiting, and on those metal benches, and Jeff's got his guitar case, and we're kind of waiting, kind of like, for her to sort herself out. She's gone to see the supervisor. So he opens the case, gets the guitar out, sits on the metal bench, and just starts noodling. Now, there's an incredible sound of a Fender Stratocaster being played when it's not plugged into an amplifier and a speaker. And
especially by Jeff Beck.
And people are coming off we were traveling in first or upper class, so we were off fairly early, and all the rest of the passengers are coming through, and they're going, that's Jeff Beck. And they're walking very slowly, listening to him going, and it was hilarious. And I'm watching this, but I'm keeping my eye on the customs officer. And she's gone to talk to the supervisor, and the supervisor has got his shirt sleeve rolled up.
Sure,
yeah. And he's going, yeah. And he looks over, he sees us, and he looks at her and goes, that shakes his head. And she's like, and she's really visibly pissed off.
Right.
And she comes out, okay, you can go.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I mean, so that was a lovely moment. But it's quite Spinal Tap if you think about it.
That is sensational. I've told this story to somebody else who mentioned Jeff Beck, actually, another guest, and weirdly, he lives next door to my aunt and uncle. So if you're ever up really late at night, you can hear him. You basically get a free Jeff Beck concert because you can hear him kind of whittling away at his guitar. So it saves you money on tickets, really. Simon, COVID hit the music and sorry, I'm gonna start again. COVID hit the music industry really quite hard. And I would say arguably the emerging scene was hit potentially the hardest because it takes longer for an unsigned artist to recover from something so catastrophic for their career. Somebody like yourself, you can get back out on tour, you're already with big names. What would your advice be to an aspiring musician, regardless of genre, that wanted to, push their career to the next step?
Wow, that's really difficult for me to answer because I'm not really in that arena anymore. I'm way too old for a start. Plus, I'm not very good with social media. I don't really want to be.
No.
But what I do know is that younger acts, it's all reliant on social media. And it's all reliant on multitasking. I mean, it's not just writing the music and recording it. I mean, that's the easy part. Yeah. It's all the other stuff you have to do, and you have to create your own market. I mean, it's I don't know how people do it. I mean, I'm producing various artists who are in that boat. They're in that same boat, but they're incredible the way they do all their social marketing and deal with that. But the reality is that reflected in sales? I mean, this has been a huge game changer, especially from my point of view, from a producer. Back in the 80s and 90s, we would sign a deal with a record company, and there would be an advance against royalties, and there would be, there's investment into the record, and there'll be hopefully a certain amount of sales, and that's how you make your living as a producer. But now it's mostly, frankly, you're doing it, you're really doing it for free, or you're doing it on a fee basis.
Right.
So, for example, a band will approach me and say, we'd really like you to produce us. Would you be able to do it? And I listened to the music and I said, well, do you have a budget? They said, yeah, we do. We have a budget, blah, 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 blah. And I go, okay. And if I like the music, if I think it's something I can, do something with and benefit them, then I'll do it. But that's from my end. That's how that's changed.
Right. I get it.
And it's very, very difficult. I mean, but the good thing, there are so many different business models now. I just did a cruise, a prog rock cruise.
I saw.
Cruise to the Edge.
I saw.
Yeah, and I met. Well, first of all, I met the drummer of Marillion, Ian Mosley, who I hadn't seen probably since 1978.
Wow.
So it was absolutely lovely to see him after all these years and catch up. And I went to see their show. It was fantastic. And there was another band too called Life Signs. And actually, I stole their sound engineer because I did. I always, at any of these kind of gigs, festivals, I always go around, listen, and just have check out what's happening. And, to me, the most important thing about sounding good at a concert is the engineer.
Absolutely.
It's the sound engineer. Make or break it. So, and I knew, it was, it just needed somebody that was a little bit more, attention to detail. And turned out that the engineer was really up for doing it. So I said, well, great, fantastic. So of course I went to see their show and sat next to him at the show. Now they're doing a whole different thing. They're doing it's like a GoFundMe type scenario.
Yeah.
they raise their budget by people contributing,
Sure.
and then they get their album out. So these Marillion have been doing that for years too. They
Right.
don't have a record company, they're all themselves.
Wow.
And I think that's a really cool thing.
It's a great way to do it.
Never been able to happen in the 70s or the 80s. So, I mean, yes, it is very tough. There's also a lot more artists out there too.
I wonder if that's true. I wonder if that is. I'm being devil's advocate here. And I've got 6 minutes until our meeting runs out. So I'm just very quickly racking my brains. But I wonder if it is true that there are more musicians out there, or if it's that the internet has just made those musicians that weren't perhaps discoverable back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Maybe the internet has managed to give them a platform for exposure. I wouldn't know.
I think there's the opportunity to become a musician. I think that is easier. First of all, you can buy something very cheap that you can record to.
It's true.
You can make pretty good tracks at home. So I think it's encouraging. But I actually do think there's more people playing instruments, writing music.
Possibly. Yeah.
But but on the other hand, back in the day, it was only the people that were signed that you really heard of, unless a friend of yours that was trying to get signed.
Yeah. I feel like I could just talk to you for hours and, have a few beers with you and, really kind of dive deeper into your work and you as a musician. But one thing we haven't touched upon that we absolutely must is your brand new album, Protocol 5, which is out now. I've listened to it. I've loved it. I always listen to albums and songs when they're first released on headphones. I felt like I was sitting in the middle of Ronnie Scott's. It was absolutely amazing. So my last question to you is, are you bringing Protocol 5 to the UK?
Well, I really hope so.
The answer is yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we will. I wanted to do it this year, but and it's funny because there are a lot of people touring right now.
Yeah.
But the problems, as you know, we've got a war going on in Eastern Europe. We've got very high fuel prices, which makes touring much more expensive. And my tour manager, who's actually he lives in Zagreb in Croatia, so he's very tuned in to what's happening, bands on the road and touring generally. He advised against it. He said, let's wait till 2023.
Okay.
He says, I don't see how we're really going to quite put together a worthwhile tour, which we can afford to do. Because thing about touring is it is tough. And especially playing the kind of size venues that Protocol would play, it's tough to make it work, make the figures work, literally.
Yeah.
And I'm too old to go out and start touring and pay for it. A huge bill at the end of the tour. So I do draw the line. After all these years, I draw the line there. I just want to be able to. I want to be able to pay the guys in the band properly what they deserve. And and do it in a reasonable level and comfort. I think my age, I think I can do that.
Definitely.
And play some really good venues, and we'll definitely be doing Ronnie Scott's. We actually had some days booked, I believe, in August, but we had to cancel them, postpone them till next year. But yes, we will definitely come over. Yeah.
When you do play Ronnie Scott's, Simon Phillips, and you let me in for free so that we can share a few beers before, I will certainly be there. And thank you so much for coming on. It has been a real pleasure for me to talk to one of my idols. So thank you.
Thank you.